All right, let's jump right in. At the very heart of, well, all of modern commerce, we're talking everything from the phone in your pocket to the coffee you're drinking right now. There's this one single massive challenge: matching what's available with what people actually want. Now, that sounds pretty simple, doesn't it? But what if I told you it's one of the most ridiculously complex puzzles in the entire global economy?
I mean, we've all been there, right? You finally decide to buy that thing you've been wanting. You go to the store, you click add to cart, and boom, it's gone, out of stock. And that frustration, that's not just bad luck. It's really just the very tip of a giant hidden iceberg. And today, we're going to dive down and see what's really happening underneath the surface. See, getting that product into your hands is literally the final step in this huge global ballet of ships and trucks and factories. And as you're about to see, just the slightest misstep in that dance, man, it can cause ripples across the entire world. Keeping it all in sync, it's everything.
And that brings us to what we're calling the Great Balancing Act. Because that's really what it is. The absolute mission here is finding that delicate equilibrium, balancing the scales between what's being made and what people want to buy.
So what makes this so incredibly hard? Well, it boils down to one word: uncertainty. Think about it. On the supply side, you've got shipments that can be delayed, factories that can have problems. And on the demand side, phew, customer tastes can change seemingly overnight. So companies are basically trying to hit a moving target in the middle of a thick fog.
Okay, so if uncertainty is the fog, how do companies actually measure how thick that fog is? How do they navigate it? Well, they use a really critical concept to try and quantify this race against time. It's called the lead time gap. To put it simply, just think of it as a race between two different clocks. The first clock, that's the company's clock. It's ticking away, measuring how long it takes them to get the materials, make the product, and ship it all the way to you. The second clock, well, that's your clock. It measures your patience, how long you're really willing to wait before you just give up and buy something else. And really, it all boils down to this. You've got the company's clock, which is measuring their entire process from the factory floor right to your front door. And then you've got your clock, measuring your expectation. That little gap between those two clocks, that space right there, is where businesses either win big or lose big. And yeah, getting this timing wrong, it leads to two different kinds of disaster. If the company's clock is too slow, what happens? You get angry customers and lost sales. Simple as that. But if their clock is too fast, if they're just making tons of stuff based on a wild guess, they risk filling up gigantic warehouses with products that absolutely nobody wants. Either way, it's a super fast track to some serious financial trouble. So the big question is, how do the smartest companies out there try to close this really dangerous gap? Well, the first major strategy is all about one thing: visibility. It's about trying to see the future just a little bit sooner than everyone else. And this quote right here, it just hits the nail on the head. For decades, supply chains were basically flying blind, They were making these massive bets based on really murky forecasts. And that lack of a clear view, it leads directly to all the problems we've been talking about. You get poor planning, tons of wasted money, and yeah, you lose revenue. So to fight against this, companies focus on something called the demand penetration point. Sounds complicated, but it's really the magic moment where the company gets to stop guessing. It's that exact point in the whole process where a product stops being just generic inventory and becomes officially assigned to your specific order. So the big strategic goal for these companies is to push that magic moment as early as possible, as far back up the supply chain as they can. Why? Because every single step they can take that's based on a real customer order instead of a flimsy forecast is just a massive win in the fight against uncertainty. Okay, so that brings us to the second big idea. And this one uses a really powerful metaphor to help us understand how companies achieve balance and agility. We're calling it the supply chain fulcrum. So let's think about that. If customer demand is this constantly shifting, totally unpredictable weight on one side of the scale, how on earth do you build a system that can stay balanced without just breaking? Well, you do it by creating shock absorbers, or what the industry calls buffers. These can be a few different things. You could have an inventory buffer, which is just holding extra stock of key parts, or maybe a capacity buffer, which means having extra production lines ready to go. You can even have a time buffer, just building some extra days into your delivery schedule. Now I want you to picture a seesaw, okay? On one end, you've got the heavy, unpredictable weight of all that customer demand. And on the other end, you've got the weight of your buffers, all that extra inventory and capacity. The fulcrum, the pivot point right in the middle, that represents the exact moment your company commits its resources to making a final product. And here's where it gets really clever. Just like on a real seesaw, right? If you move the fulcrum closer to the heavier object, it takes way less effort to lift it. In supply chain terms, this means delaying that final commitment. So, for example, instead of making 1,000,000 red t-shirts, you make 1,000,000 plain white ones and only dye them red when a real order comes in. By moving that fulcrum, you can satisfy the exact same demand with way less inventory and risk. That right there is agility in action. But, okay, even if you have perfect visibility and incredible agility, there is still a third piece to this puzzle. It's the one that really ties everything together, and that's collaboration. I mean, think about it. If every single company in the supply chain is just trying to guess what the others are doing, all you create is more noise and more chaos. So the ultimate strategy, the real game changer, is for everyone, the manufacturer, the distributor, the retailer, to just put down their crystal balls and start talking to each other, to start sharing real information. Now, this whole collaborative approach actually has a formal name. It's called CPFR, which stands for Collaborative Planning, Forecasting, and Replenishment. But you can just think of it as a playbook for getting everyone who touches a product from start to finish to work from the exact same sheet of music. They all use the same shared data to plan and react together as a single team. So here's a simple breakdown of how it works. It all starts with you, the consumer. The moment you buy something, the retailer doesn't just hoard that information. No, they share that real-time sales data directly with the manufacturer. And the manufacturer then uses that actual, real-world data, not some dusty old forecast, to know exactly what they need to make and ship next. What this does is create one single, clean signal of demand that everyone in the chain can see at the same time. So, there you have it. Those are the 3 pillars of a modern resilient supply chain. You need visibility so you can see demand coming. You need agility so you can respond to it quickly by moving that fulcrum. And you need collaboration to make sure everyone is looking at and reacting to the same reality. So, these big strategies, visibility, agility, and collaboration, this is how the modern world tries to keep this whole thing in balance. But it all leads to a huge question for the future. In a world that only seems to be getting more volatile, more unpredictable, can our supply chains ever really be smart enough to keep up? Can this balancing act ever truly be won? Or is that race between the company's clock and your clock just destined to get faster and faster and faster?